How are we doing, folks? Welcome back to the channel. So no sooner had I pressed upload on my prior video going through the system requirements for Grey Zone Warfare, I literally got an email from Steam saying it is now available to download. So we've gone ahead and purchased it and downloaded it, and we're now going to see what kind of FPS we get. So we're in our kind of base at the moment, so we're kind of in a safe area. We shouldn't get shot while trying to see what FPS we're going to get. And at the moment we are running at 4K on the Epic preset. But there's a couple of caveats. We've got DLSS set to quality on the Super Resolution, and we've also got Frame Generation on. So if you look at the moment, we're getting around about 100 FPS. Another thing to look at is the RAM usage. We did say in the system requirements video, for those of you that watched it, that I'd be interested to see how much more than 16 gig of RAM it uses, because it did say minimum was 16, recommended 32, and it seems that we're hovering around, well, almost 19 gigs. So yeah, clearly 16 is the minimum required. Okay, so I think we can safely say while we've been wandering around, we're kind of at around the 100 FPS mark, but that is with frame generation, so goodness knows what we're actually going to get if we turn that off. Part of me wonders, is it simply doubling it up? So as we stand here, 100 FPS, let's go into the settings and disable frame generation. All right, that is DLSS frame generation off, although we are still using the upscaling element of DLSS. So we have that set to quality, and we're now getting 72, 73 FPS, so around about a 25% reduction on what we had with frame generation. So frame gen wasn't simply taking 50 and doubling it to 100. We are still able to get over 60 FPS at 4K at the Epic preset without frame generation. And frame gen, I'm not sold on it on games like this, I've got to be honest. Games that require reaction times, accuracy, not loving frame gen. Now, those of you that follow my other channel, my flight simulation channel, you'll know that in that context, I love frame generation because it's, you know, flight sim is a very slow moving game. Even when you're just coming into land in a big airliner, there's really not a lot of movement happening on screen. Compare and contrast to flicking around the mouse, you know, here, there, and everywhere. Very different. And I can already tell just by moving around that the game feels a lot more alive. It just felt there was a slight latency with the frame generation, and that's always the case. That's not really a dig at Grey Zone. It's just one of those inherent issues with frame generation. Story-based games, you know, like Starfield, for example, like Cyberpunk, I could probably tolerate it if you're just running around shooting, you know, bots essentially, enjoying the story. You know, no problem there at all. So let's turn off the DLSS altogether and see what we get when we do 4K native Epic. Okay, so this is without any DLSS at all. So no Super Resolution, no frame generation, and we are not getting anywhere near 60 FPS. And this is with an NVIDIA 4080 Super, 5800X 3D, and 32 gig of DDR4, 3600 memory, CL16. So not a slouch of a system by any means, but I think, you know, just to get anywhere near 60 FPS or above it, you're going to need to do some kind of DLSS upscaling trickery. My goodness. Yeah. I remember in the system requirements video, I was literally recording that like 4 hours ago, and I was thinking, you know, this is going to be a heavy hitting game, and wow, yeah. Turns out I wasn't wrong. All right, let's go to a more sensible preset. Maybe we'll try high or medium or something. I'll have a look in the settings and see what there is. I haven't actually dived too much into it, and we'll catch up in a moment. Okay, so we are on the high preset. I've turned back on frame generation and DLSS super sampling to give us an idea of relative performance compared to what we started with. And of course, that was around about 100 FPS, and we've barely netted ourselves 10 FPS just going from Epic to high. This is at 4K, frame gen on, and DLSS set to quality. So what happens then if we go down and turn off the DLSS? So, okay, so turning all DLSS functionality off, so that's frame gen and the upscaling, and we're still not anywhere near 60, are we? And this is at the high preset. So not Epic, the high preset. 53 FPS, wandering around our little base camp here. Wow. And obviously dropping a little bit as we do a sprint there. Okay, so what do we need to do to get 4K native 60 FPS? How far do we need to go? Okay, so again, all DLSS functionality is off. And this is medium, 4K medium, and we're not... Well, okay, we are now. We are just getting 60 FPS. Only just. On a 4080 Super. 5800X 3D. Wow, this game is a heavy hitter. I mean, it does look good. I mean, look at that. I feel like I'm almost reliving the experience of loading Crysis for the first time. Quite reminiscent of that. All the vegetation. It's absolutely stunning. But we're still not at 60 FPS, are we? Okay, let's turn on the DLSS features one at a time. Let's go for the upscaling. First of all, we'll turn that on to quality. Because I think 4K quality is kind of the sweet spot. Yeah, there it is. So now we're almost at 90. Almost at 90. And you can see the GPU is maxed out. So obviously it doesn't look like we're being CPU limited, which is always nice. And I did wonder that from the system requirements, because they were talking, whenever they mentioned about their CPUs that they're recommending, they're kind of talking about old, quite modest CPUs, which did make me think, are we going to be GPU bound here more than CPU bound? And you know, obviously it's early days. I'm literally, what, 8 minutes, 9 minutes into this video, and this is the first time I've loaded the game, so you're kind of getting my raw reaction to it. This isn't rehearsed or scripted or anything like that. This is just me here kind of goofing around trying to figure out what's going on. 90 FPS with DLSS set to quality at medium. What if we turn on frame gen? How much more will that buy us, I wonder? Let's just quickly turn that on. So frame gen on, DLSS quality. So now we're approaching 120 all of a sudden. We are approaching 120. And I think frame gen, if you start from a higher base FPS, it does become more tolerable. I'm still not the biggest fan of it, mind, but yeah, almost touching 120 FPS at medium 4K. Wow. Okay, what about low? Okay, that's weird. So at low, we haven't really changed an awful lot, have we? Just getting about 120 FPS. I wonder if there's some sort of cap going on here that I'm unaware of. I mean, it says in the menu that the frame rate is uncapped. You know, we've got the GPU sat there at 50 to 80%. GPU pegged at 100%. Yeah, about 120 FPS. All right, so let's turn off frame gen. Yeah, frame gen, we're back down to the sort of 80s. So it seems that between low and medium, I'm not seeing an awful lot of difference, at least at 4K. At least at 4K. So the next thing to do then is to drop the res down to 1440p and see what differences we get. Okay, so now we are at 1440p, epic preset, DLSS frame generation on, DLSS Super Resolution set to quality. And this is a lot more encouraging, as you know, my monitor is a 165Hz monitor, 1440p, so we are approaching maxing that out. If you look at the frame rates there, 150, 149. That's not looking bad at all, although that is with frame gen on, which I'm not the biggest fan of. Let's turn that off. Alright, so without frame generation, with DLSS still set to quality, we are back down to around about 100 FPS. But that is on the Epic preset, of course. Goodness only knows what we're going to get when we turn DLSS Super Resolution off. I suspect we'll be down to the 70s, maybe 60s. Don't know. What do you think? Let's see. Yeah, okay, that was a pretty good prediction. We are around about 70 to 80 FPS, so that's 1440p native. No funny business with DLSS on the Epic preset. But as is often the case, Epic is kind of, you know, with a lot of games, you're kind of into the point of diminishing returns. So let's turn it down a bit. We'll go down to high. We'll do native to native first, then we'll turn the DLSS stuff back on as we go. So we're about 75 now on Epic. Let's see what high gets us. Not a lot, it would seem. Maybe like 7 FPS. GPU still absolutely slammed. 97, 98%. Around about 85 FPS. Okay, so we are probably going to need DLSS with this, aren't we? Wow, Unreal 5 can be an absolute monster, can't it? I mean, it does look... I mean, look at it. It's fantastic, but my goodness. Okay, let's turn on some DLSS on the high setting. Alright, this is 1440p high with DLSS quality, and we are still not getting past the 100 FPS mark. We're sort of around the 90s. And with frame gen, I'm going to quickly turn frame gen on, so we're sort of around 80, 90-ish. And frame gen, look at that, we have surpassed the refresh rate of my monitor in some cases. So frame gen is really pumping up that frame rate, although it does bother me. It still bothers me that this is going to be a reaction-based first-person shooter multiplayer title, and frame gen and that, in my view, does not go together well at all. Don't be alarmed if you feel like the video that you're watching is a little bit stuttery. It's because of the way I'm capturing it. It's only capturing 60 of those frames, so it can sometimes look a little bit teary and a little bit weird, but rest assured it's looking great for me on, you know, as I'm playing it. Oh, okay, so what have we got to do to get something reasonably high at 1440p in terms of frame rate? I guess we're going to have to go to medium, aren't we? Let's go medium without any DLSS and see what we get, just kind of raw native performance at medium 1440p. So yeah, 1440p, medium, no DLSS, no frame generation, just raw performance, and we are hovering around 90 FPS with a 4080 Super 5800X3D. Flip. Wow, that's quite something. Now, low didn't seem to make an awful lot of difference when we're in 4K, did it? So let's jump down to low and just see if that frame rate changes. So 92, 93, remember that, and we'll see if low gets us much higher. Yeah, so low really hasn't changed an awful lot. I mean, we've gone from, what, 92, 93 to, well, 93 again, but we were at 95, 96, 97, but it's very, very minimal, isn't it? It seems to have a very minimal impact completely. So, with that in mind, let's go back to medium and turn on DLSS and see what kind of benefit that gets us. So we just come down to here, frame gen on, and we'll go for quality. Yeah, and all of a sudden, look at that. Far surpassing the refresh rate of my monitor, albeit with frame generation. Yeah, frame gen really does help out here, doesn't it, a lot? Well, there's only one thing for it. 1080p. I'd be curious to know how many of you do play these kind of games at 1080p, because I feel like if you were to follow the kind of, you know, tech tubers and reviewers, it's almost like 1080p, you kind of get the feeling that it's like, ugh, 1080p, who's playing at 1080p? But I'd be surprised. I bet a lot of people still do, and it wasn't that long ago 1080p was seen as like the gold standard for like a gaming experience. You know, I remember kind of thinking, oh, do I go 720p, do I go 1080? And 1080 was like, oh, this is like the holy grail if I can just get to 1080p. Whereas now it's just like, you know, these GPUs can just poop out a 1080p kind of experience, seemingly without breaking too much of a sweat. So let's go back to 1080p. We'll start with Epic, and we will run through the settings, all the presets, and see what's what. Okay, here we go. So this is 1080p Epic with frame generation on and DLSS set to quality, and now we are comfortably in the 2s in terms of our frame rate, sometimes dipping down to 180s, 190s. But yeah, this is much more of a high refresh rate experience, and the GPU is still, I mean, it's not completely tapped out, so there is a little bit of room to spare, and I think this is probably the first time we've seen that in this video, where the GPU isn't completely running into the red line. Let's turn off frame gen and see what we get just with some DLSS upscaling, which is currently set to quality. Yeah, okay, so without frame generation, we are kind of at around the 120. So this is 1080p Epic with DLSS quality. Wow, and GPU usage is at around 80%. So are we looking at a bit of a CPU bottleneck maybe at this point? I appreciate the CPU utilization only says 50%, therefore you might think, well, it's got another 50% to go, so how can it be CPU utilized? But you got to keep in mind that one thread typically does most of the work with a game. So if that one thread is tapped out, and you've got an 8-core CPU, you know, that could be 12.5% CPU usage if that one thread is maxed out. So it's not always as clear cut as it seems. Let's turn off. Let's turn off the DLSS quality, and we'll see what kind of frame rates we get if we just go raw 1080p. Yeah, as I thought, not a lot of difference at all. So I think we're probably looking at a CPU limitation at this point rather than a GPU limitation. So that's interesting. That is interesting. I wonder how new CPU... Because keep in mind, new CPUs probably aren't that far away. We've got Zen 5 coming up. We've got Intel 15th Gen. So it'll be quite interesting to start testing some of that stuff and see what the deal is with that. But yeah, it seems that we are more or less capped with our frame rate at the moment. Now, keep in mind that we are on the Epic preset, and although you might think, well, Epic preset will probably only affect the GPU, some graphic settings can also put a heavier load onto your CPU, so it might be that we get a higher frame rate as we go down the preset. So let's start with going down to high. Yeah, so we are on the high preset, no DLSS, no frame gen, no nothing. We're still kind of around the same, aren't we? Still roughly around the same. Again, don't be alarmed if the footage looks a little bit choppy. It's my capture card on my streaming PC that's capturing this. That's another thing. I'm not running OBS in the background on my gaming PC. This is all raw performance being captured by a separate capture card on a streaming PC. So, or in this case, recording PC. But yeah, not a lot of difference there. So let's go down to medium. Starting to get nearer to 120 there for a moment, weren't we? But it was very, very brief. Still around the 105, 107 mark at medium. What about if we go to low? Maybe low will take out some things that are causing the CPU some extra work. That can be the case sometimes. Right. There we go. Let's go down to low. Okay, so we're still roughly at the same, aren't we? I mean, it's quite erratic. We're kind of going from 80, 90, 100. Sometimes we're getting up nearer to 120 with the low preset, but I'm feeling very much like we've got a bit of a CPU limit on our hands here. That is kind of my gut feeling at the moment. Could be wrong, but it does seem that, you know, we're at 1080p. We've gone all the way from epic, all the way down to high, medium to low, and we're still roughly at the 10 somethings in terms of FPS. Wow. So, if you have a 7800X3D and you also happen to play this, I'd love to hear from you, because I'm obviously stuck on a 5800X3D. I did really want a 7800X3D, but the cost of buying the chip and the motherboard and the RAM was significantly more than just simply buying the 5800X3D that I got for a blinding deal of like $250 on Amazon. It went super low one day, so it did make sense financially just to drop it in and call it done. My next upgrade probably will be Zen 5, because that would probably make more sense to, you know, get the motherboard and the RAM and all the other stuff to go with the chip at that point. But it seems like we're on a bit of a CPU limit here. But what an incredible looking game. I mean, even at 1080p low, it's hard to argue, isn't it? What a brilliant game. Let me know how you all get on, because I've got a funny feeling this is going to be quite a big topic of conversation as time goes by, because this game looks to be a massively heavy hitting game. And of course, this is kind of the first Unreal Engine 5 game I've played properly on my PC, and certainly the first-person shooter open world style Unreal 5 engine game as well. So it's I feel like we're in uncharted territory here, for me at least. Let me know in the comments how you're getting on with the game, how it's running, what you're running it on. Share the knowledge, share it around, just let's get as much info out there to help people. Because I would imagine there's going to be a lot of people that are considering a build or an upgrade to go along with this game. And, you know, just games in general, because there's only one way this stuff's going to go, and it's going to be more performance required, I think. Anyway, folks, I'm going to stop rambling and leave it there. Thank you all very much for watching. I hope you enjoy the game. If you are going to be playing it, I certainly will be, hopefully, if, you know, time allows. And take the very best care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.